Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. For today's review, patron Sam Kassan has asked me to pick something, and so I've chosen a film called either Live, Die, Repeat, Edge of Tomorrow, or both, depending on which DVD or poster you see for the film. Either way, the movie came out in 2014. The story about the story. Edge of Tomorrow started out as a Japanese light novel called All You Need Is Kill. I should note that the original title is in English, and so I can only imagine that the syntax makes more sense in Japanese. The author is Hiroshi Sakurazaka. Sakurazaka started writing in 2002, creating a light novel series with the English name Modern Magic Made Simple, which was later adapted into an anime. All You Need Is Kill is a standalone novel, somewhat unusual for Japanese light novels, and it got the author some positive attention and an English translation in 2009. Sakurazaka has said that the plot of the book was inspired by the way you can keep reloading a checkpoint or an earlier save when you play a hard section of a video game, although he also watched Groundhog Day before writing the book. Viz Media, the English-language publisher of the book, initially approached the producer Erwin Stoff to hopefully get a Hollywood adaptation going, and Stoff convinced a scriptwriter named Dante Harper to write a spec script based on the book. They got Warner Brothers to buy the script in 2010, but it was almost completely rewritten 6 times before filming began. By that point, the only things that really survived from the original novel were the time loop premise, the alien attack, the fact that the story centers around a man and a woman, and the idea of exoskeletal power armor. The male lead of Edge of Tomorrow is Tom Cruise as Major William Cage, and I probably don't have to introduce him to any of you. Cruise's initial breakout role was the comedy film Risky Business back in 1983, although it wasn't long before he started his career in action movies with Top Gun in 1986. Cruise has been a successful leading actor in every decade he's been active, from 90s films like A Few Good Men and Interview with a Vampire, aughts films like Minority Report and War of the Worlds, and teens movies like Jack Reacher and Edge of Tomorrow. Cruise reportedly has some personal issues, but when it comes to acting, he is dedicated to the craft. The female lead is Emily Blunt as Sergeant Rita Vertasky. Blunt began her acting career with British stage shows and TV dramas, and she rose to international prominence thanks to her supporting role in 2006's The Devil Wears Prada. In 2012, she got a starring role in a different time loop film called Looper. Go figure. The budget for the film was $178 million, and it made $370.5 million at the box office. Those are some pretty decent numbers, but they were less than what Warner was hoping to get from a summer blockbuster. Thus, when Warner released the film on home video, they apparently made the Live, Die, Repeat tagline more visible in an attempt to muddy the waters and make it look like some other film, which is kind of an odd thing to do, considering that the film still made a profit even after you include marketing costs, and it got a positive reception from the critics. They enjoyed the way the film uses humor to create a dark comedy atmosphere, and they praised the movie for being intelligent and well-crafted, at least by action film standards. But now, why don't I add my opinion to the pile? The review. An alien with a hive mind crashes to Earth in Central Europe and quickly overruns every nation's defenses. The only time humanity scores a victory is in Verdun, in northeast France. But now, the United Human Forces are about to begin an all-out assault from every angle, including across the English Channel into Normandy. Major William Cage, a U.S. Army public relations officer, unexpectedly finds himself on the front lines of the assault, and the general in charge busts him down to private when he tries to weasel his way out of it. The beach landing turns out to be a massacre, and Cage dies when he blows up a large blue alien and its acid blood melts his face. But then Cage wakes up the day before, alive and well. He repeats the day and the massacre several times, and no one seems to believe him about it, but then, when he tries to contact Sergeant Rita Vertasky, the Angel of Verdun, she tells him to contact her when he wakes up again. So he meets with her as he's training the day before, and she explains that she got the same power to reset time when an alpha alien bled on her in Verdun, but then she lost it when she got wounded and needed a blood transfusion. Vertasky trains Cage so that he can survive the beach landing until he gets a vision of the Omega, the heart of the hive mind, hiding in an alpine dam in Germany. And then they work on getting through the Normandy landing so that they can make it to the dam. Cage grows close to Vertasky during their repeated attempts, but Vertasky keeps dying on the trip no matter what he does. In the end, he makes the trip alone, but then discovers that the Omega isn't there. It was all a trap to capture Cage and bleed him out. Fortunately, he manages to drown himself before they can do so. So, Cage and Vertasky change tactics and infiltrate the command headquarters to get a confiscated tool that will let Cage find where the Omega really is. But, on their last successful attempt, they get captured by military police, and Cage bleeds out and gets a blood transfusion, thus losing his power. Still, they now know the Omega is in Paris, and so Cage and Vertasky escape and then convince a squad of soldiers to go on a suicidal midnight raid with them. Everyone dies, but they successfully complete the mission. Fortunately, the Omega bleeds on Cage just as he dies, and so the day resets one last time, and humanity celebrates a confusingly easy victory. The production values of Edge of Tomorrow are as top-notch as you'd expect from a modern blockbuster, and both the aliens and the soldier exosuits are remarkably believable, even though the aliens are all CG and the exosuits are unpowered. And while the film features fighting pretty consistently throughout the film, it paces itself well, with regular quiet moments where the audience can breathe and the characters have a chance to get to know each other and reflect on their decisions. I'd say one of the biggest issues I have with the film is that we don't get enough time with J-Squad, the squad that Cage is forced to fight with during the Normandy invasion. They are a colorful group of soldiers, but the movie mostly forgets about them after the intro, only to suddenly remember them just in time for the big climax in Paris. Now the film does spend this time well by focusing on the two lead characters, but it still feels like a wasted opportunity. Something else the film does is pay homage to other war films, hence why the landing is in Normandy instead of the more sensible Calais, and why the Omega is pretending to hide in a German dam. The action in the landing section gets pretty much as gruesome as the PG-13 rating allows, and for the most part they accomplish this by cutting away at the last possible second before things get gory. As it is, when you watch this film, you'll see faces melting off, people getting crushed, heads getting shot, explosions, spinal injuries, and eviscerations that just happen to take place right or left of where the camera is pointed. The distinction between PG-13 and R has never been all that big, but they shave it down to a razor for this film. One more thing I appreciate about this film is the way it controls what we see and what we don't see. When a film is based around a time loop like this, it's important to know when to show the first time something happens, when to skip to the successful run, and when to spend some screen time on montages of the main character learning how to get through a difficult moment. The movie does a pretty good job of knowing which thing to present when, so I'd say that both the editing and the writing are top-notch. I also like how the film doesn't have a heavy color filter, which to me is usually more distracting than it is mood-setting. Ultimately, I'd say that Edge of Tomorrow, or Live, Die, Repeat, whatever you want to call it, is an overlooked film, and if you are at all a fan of action movies, you should give it a watch. The analysis. So, when someone sacrifices themselves and then comes back to life, there's inevitably going to be a comparison to Jesus. But when someone dies repeatedly and keeps getting second chances, that's when you get a comparison to reincarnation. After all, the protagonist fails, comes back, tries and fails again, returns again, and the cycle is only broken once the protagonist finally succeeds and attains enlightenment. The theme of reincarnation is stronger in Groundhog Day, but elements of it are still present in Edge of Tomorrow. William Cage starts the film by admitting that he became a public relations specialist because it keeps him away from the actual fighting. He's supposed to be a soldier, but he's too scared of combat to risk his life for his country. At one point, early on, he tries to give up on training and surviving the beach landing, but when he does that, the aliens attack London and he dies anyway. At that point, Cage realizes that by fighting, he is fighting to save his own life. Later on, Cage gets to know Vertasky and becomes reluctant to put her life in danger. And so now, Cage has a reason to fight that is more than his own survival. And then, at the end of the film, Cage goes into battle and lays down his life to defeat the enemy, despite knowing that this time he will not get to come back again afterwards. It is at this moment that he completes his journey and becomes a true soldier. And his reward for this enlightenment is to live in a world in which the war is over. Something else this film has elements of is cosmic horror, but it approaches that horror from an unusual angle. The aliens of the film are very alien, both in how they look and how they work, but then Cage gets to use the aliens' time-traveling ability to his advantage. The aliens in this film don't represent the unknown, and as a matter of fact, we learn pretty much everything we need to know about them before the midpoint of the movie. Instead, it seems like the future itself is the unknown horror. Cage has to work his way through the Normandy landing moment by moment so that he and Vertasky can get out of there alive. And yet no matter what he tries or how many times he resets, one of them always dies. And even when he succeeds, it turns out that the mission itself was a trap from the very beginning. The future, then, is the true enemy in this movie. The future brings fire and destruction and death, and no matter how many times Cage resets or tries to avoid it, the future always comes for him. Death and tragedy are inevitable. However, there is a narrow path ahead of him, and while it's full of pain and sacrifice and hardship, it does lead to a better future, a better world. It's not an easy path to follow, and Cage keeps straying away from it. But in the end, his hard work and determination pay off, not just for himself, but for all those around him. Cage is hampered by his lack of knowledge, he is led astray by outside forces, and he is tempted by his attachments, but ultimately he walks the right path and thus makes the world a better place. I'd say this theme is also very Buddhist, but honestly, the narrow path of virtue is a common element in just about every major religion in the world. So with that in mind, with the cosmic horror in this case being the future and the cure being virtue and knowledge, perhaps our recurring theme should be stated as fear the unknown, but also confront it and understand it. Because if you can be brave in the face of your fears, you will know what the most virtuous path is ahead of you. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.